Please join me in welcoming our guest for today, Mr. Ron Howard.
Thank you all.
Welcome.
Well, I appreciate your standing around in the cold to be here. So
this was our first guest. She was here at 1 o'clock today.
Oh my gosh! Well, thank you.
So she gets a good seat.
Well, I'm gonna direct every answer to you.
Ron, thank you for doing this. First of all, we appreciate your spending part of your Sunday with us. I know you're in town to talk about the movie a bit this weekend, and it'll be opening on December 11th. Congratulations on In the Heart of the Sea.
Thank you.
Why don't we just sort of a easy kind of softball question to get us started, but I think it would help sort of lay the foundation. If you just give us a little bit of background, tell us about how you came to be involved in this project. Were you always going to direct it? Tell me about some of the early conversations that you had that led you into this project.
Well, I'd had a great experience with Chris Hemsworth on Rush, where he had won that role with an audition that he actually made himself in a hotel room from location somewhere, wherever he was working, and sent in. And Peter Morgan, who wrote Rush and who had also written Frost Nixon, very discerning, critical guy, and great eye about casting. He and I looked at each other and just felt like, well, he had everything it took to bring that character to life. And I was very impressed with him. Of course, there's Thor and Snow White and these high-profile fantasy projects that he's been in that are so popular. But I found him to be a really creatively ambitious young actor, delving into the James Hunt character, identifying ways to give the character even more complexity, and I really enjoyed working with him. Fantastic attitude, work ethic, and everything. Then he brought me this project. He said, this is something that I've had my eye on for a while. And in fact, I recognized that it was a script that had been around for a long time. I had never read it. But I took a look at it, and I thought it was fascinating, very challenging. The water, the whale. I mean, there's a lot of meat on that bone. But I wasn't sure. Then I found out it was based on real events, and I had no idea that the novel Moby-Dick was inspired by a real event where a whale of that scope, that scale, that intensity, ferocity had sunk a ship. Then I started to delve into the real story, read Nat Philbrick's book, which is fantastic, and it fulfilled a lot of things that I was really interested in doing, and had always been. I'd once tried to make a movie about the Greenpeace ship Rainbow Warrior and this real life adventure that it had been involved in the 70s. I couldn't get that movie off the ground. Then I developed and prepped Jack London's Seawolf, and that was a movie that ultimately wasn't really viable. I wasn't able to cast it in the way that I believed we needed to. Well, here was an amazing story that had everything I was interested in: the drama of the sea, the interesting ways that to test characters out there, plus this mythic component, and fantastic acting opportunities, which is something that I'm always looking for. And I also knew that Chris was born to play Owen Chase. When you read about who the real Owen Chase was, what he looked like, the way he carried himself, and so forth.
So you mentioned not only being intrigued by it, but seeing some inherent challenges. What were some of those inherent challenges in the material? And tell us a bit about how you overcame them.
Well, I mean, as I begin to promote the movie and really think about it, it's come to me that that this is really the most challenging and complicated movie that I've ever made, given the array of challenges. That first there's the logistics of shooting something in the water, and with this amount of action. And so some of it's in a tank, some of it's out in the ocean. For budgetary reasons, we had to shoot as much as we could at sea. That's daunting. I had some experience with that with Splash, and quite a bit in Cocoon, actually. So I had some favorable experiences going for me. Then there's the question of the CGI whale, and something I had no experience with. but I had seen Life of Pi recently, and when I went to the VFX supervisor who had done Rush, Jody Johnson, who had created so much photo real CGI enhancement in that movie, which is about Formula One racers, where we had a lot of real cars, but he was able to put CGI cars alongside the real cars, and you really couldn't tell the difference. He said, well, about Life of Pi, he said, well, that's the technology from 2 years ago. I promise you we can deliver this. And so I took that leap of faith. And then there was the fact that, it was a dense story. I felt like the ambition of it and the density of it was a real plus. People like that. I mean, look at the TV shows that we all follow now. They're complicated sets of characters. There are moral dilemmas and complexities. And I thought this story had a kind of modern thematic element blended with this big scale classic adventure action story. So, the challenges ultimately are what drew me to it. I just acknowledged that, it was going to be a lot of work, and there was a lot to sort out.
In a moment, we're going to watch a clip, but before we do, and this is my little signal to the booth, we're going to watch a clip that features Chris at a kind of an early meal with a few of the other folks. But I think maybe a way to sort of introduce the story and introduce a little bit about the film. Maybe tell us a bit more about Chris's character, and it's going to come out a little bit in this scene we're going to watch. But give us a setup.
Well, Chris is playing the first mate, Owen Chase. As you would see in Philbrick's book, if you haven't read it, it's great. By the way, what a great piece of history, and he's a great writer of history. Owen Chase was the first mate who was very, very experienced and really believed he should be captain. And Pollard was from a famous whaling family, kind of whaling aristocracy, and he was given the captaincy ahead of Owen Chase. But they paid Owen Chase well, and they said, basically you need to support this rookie, and swallow your pride, and and do what it takes to help him have a successful voyage. And Chase was always a bit of an outsider because he wasn't born on Nantucket, and so there was always that tension and that feeling that there was that there was a little prejudice against him and his background.
Great setup. Ron and his friends at Warner Brothers, our friends at Warner Brothers, have sent over 3 clips that we're going to watch. So let's take a look at the very first clip from In the Heart of the Sea. Thanks. Okay. In a couple of the other clips we're going to talk about, and we're going to see, you're going to be out on the water. But before we get out on the water, help us understand a bit more, tell us a bit more about creating the world of this film, designing it, the kinds of research that you and your team explored to sort of create a world that would be not only authentic, but that would contain this story and these characters.
Well, the authenticity was as important to me and really everyone involved as it had been on Apollo 13, for example. And so we really did let the research be our guide. There are a lot of references, a lot written about it. Nantucket was a fascinating cross-cultural center in a way, we tried to quickly sort of reference as much of that as we possibly could.
And it was the center of whale oil, of the whale oil industry, I guess, right?
Well, that's an interesting fact that I didn't know, was that whaling wasn't just something that that some people did like fishing or anything else. It was actually sort of one of these central economic engines of the United States and several other nations as well, and there was that kind of competition, and there was there was a global market for the whale oil, and it was as intense and competitive then as it is today, and so that was there in the original script that I read, and that sort of that was one of those modern themes that I was talking about, is that things haven't changed all that much, and that these guys are not going out there for the romance or the adventure. They're like people going off into the offshore drilling or the pipeline. I mean, they're going out there to try to feed their families, and in this case, it's not drilling. It's hunting and harvesting and butchering these whales. So it was a brutal existence. It was a dangerous existence. They often went off for years at a time, but they were also kind kind of the de facto explorers of their time. They were really the astronauts of their time in a lot of ways.
So interesting to learn more about the historical context, certainly. But you weave in this film together not only the historical context, but the tremendous sense of adventure. At times probably exhilarating,
Right.
and at times, as we see in the film, extremely challenging. In fact, pushing people to their complete ultimate limits.
Well, that's what was interesting about the story, and it sort of begins, and I do sort of allow the movie to be romanticized just a little bit. That it is a bit of an adventure, and the cabin boy played by Tom Holland, Thomas Nickerson, obviously a real character. He was the cabin boy and the last survivor, and he was wide-eyed, and I sort of try to see the movie from his perspective, and slowly but surely it begins to reveal itself as this intense, violent, dangerous way of life, and an experience that was raw and primal, and sort of a little bit threatening to your soul in a way.
You've mentioned a couple of times, you've referenced how the script evolved. You said this was a script that was out there, obviously it hadn't been made yet. You got involved. Tell us about an aspect or a couple of aspects that you that evolved from the time that you got involved with it to actually shooting it. Were there areas that you explored, or characters that you brought out or pushed back, or tell us more about that?
Phil Brick also wrote another great book called Why Read Moby-Dick. It's a small little essay-sized book, and it's fascinating. And I had a chance to talk with Nathaniel a good deal about it, but it actually offers a lot of insight into what Melville was seeing in the Essex story, in addition to his own life experiences, because of course Moby-Dick is fiction. But he took more than just the attack of the whale. He didn't do the survival story that was the story of the Essex and really the heart and soul of the story. But a lot of the themes, man versus nature, some of the darker ideas of sort of pursuing these whales out of a sense of greed and pride, fueling the pursuit. These are ideas that are sort of evidenced in the story of the Essex, that are there in the journals of the survivors, and so I tried to heighten that, and the Ben Whishaw as Melville and Brendan Gleeson as the older Nickerson, the survivor. I tried to make that not just a bookend, not just a sort of narrative device, but its own sort of journey. And I was really proud of those scenes. The performances were just great, and I tried to make that its own sort of psychological and emotional gauntlet that was dangerous in a different kind of way. So that created a little bit of perspective and tension between these two stories. But again, I like the ambition of this story, and I feel like that audiences today deserve ambitious movies. They want them, and I felt like this was one of those opportunities to give it's an adventure. It's big. It's got lots of action. I hope the people who see it on a big screen if possible. It's that kind of immersive experience. I hope that's how people feel. That's certainly what's intended. But it also has great human drama, and it's actually about something. So it was a combination of things that I really found fun. Every day at work, the scenes were always about more than one thing, and I found that really really interesting.
So, as a way to follow up on that, we're going to take a look at the next clip, and after we do that, maybe you can give us a little bit of context, not only about shooting this scene. Give us maybe some insights, maybe some background on where it was shot, how it was shot, maybe some anecdote that might relate to the scene we're about to watch. Let's take a look at the clip, and then we'll come back and
Great.
talk about it.
Oh, you didn't show them the storm, did you?
Well, you need to go to the theater to see the storm.
It's all anticipation.
But that little tone of music that you hear right at the end of that clip gives you a sense of the fact that storm is not going to be easy for them to endure.
And that's taken right out of the ship's journal. Well, the ship's journal's gone, but it's right out of the records of the voyage. And it is an amazing thing. when you deal with a true story, the first time that I ever did it was Apollo 13, and it terrified me. And I thought it might limit my creativity, But even though I've always really loved history and thought about being a journalist, if I hadn't been able to succeed transitioning from a child actor, into the career I wanted, which is fortunately the one I have, I probably would have been a basketball coach or a high school basketball coach, an English teacher, or a sports, sports writer, a journalist. What's great about dealing with a true story is you can choose these events that stretch, sort of what we imagine human beings can face, and choices that characters make that shock us and surprise us. There's a story that I want to tell. When I was doing the audience previews for Apollo 13. This is before any advertising. It was just a rough cut of the movie, audience screening where they hand out the cards and you rate the movie. It always played very well, very triumphant ending and so forth. And I was thrilled as a director. Even though I have final cut, I always like to know what audiences think of the movie and try to reconcile those things as best I can. But so 400 people saw the movie. It was probably like 95% excellent, and it was just great. But there was one frickin' poor. So out of the 400 cards, which one do I have to go find first? And I found it, and it was a 23-year-old Caucasian male, and I just didn't like anything at all about it. But it was no real comments, just these big negative remarks with bold pencil strokes. Finally, I couldn't figure out what was bugging this young guy, and I flipped it over, and finally it said, "Please comment on the ending." And he said, "Terrible, more Hollywood bullshit. They would never survive." And of course, no advertising. A young guy, he had no idea it was real. So it was a true story. And it made me realize then and there, well, this is the value of a true story. And this movie is a little bit of a cousin to Apollo 13. The themes are more complex. What the characters face is darker in a lot of ways. But it is also about redefining yourself in the face of that kind of adversity and that struggle to get home and to survive. And those elements are there. And so it's what attracted me about this story. Now, everything you saw there was shot in the ocean. This is sort of a labor of love movie from in terms of from the actors, the writers, producers, and director. In other words, even though it's a studio movie, we agreed to contracts that were sort of like what you'd get for an indie movie. Because Warner Brothers was willing to step up and support everything else about the movie at an A level. And we knew that's what it would take. All the money was going to go on the screen. But it was such a rare opportunity to be a part of a story like this. So rich, so dense, complicated, yet really, really exciting. And we shot, therefore, a lot of it in the ocean, more than you would probably normally do, given technology. So everything you just saw there was shot, on a real tall ship out in the ocean, and a lot of our survival, almost all of our survival sequences are in the ocean when the guys are starving, and it brought a kind of an extra measure of reality. It forced me to shoot it with a sort of an intimacy that I was really grateful for, and I tried to take a modern cinematic approach to this movie, so it didn't fall into the formality of the kind of classic approach. I allowed that in the first part of the movie, and then after that, I sort of went, for something very real, very spontaneous looking. And Anthony Dodd Mantle, who had also done Rush, of course, did Slumdog Millionaire and 28 Days Later. Was just great at creating that intimacy. We got to the storm, which was shot on the back lot at Leavesden, which is the Warner Brothers studio in London, on their tank, but it was in November already. It was getting very cold. We had to shoot at night because that was the way to get the look of the storm clouds having come in. And the ship deck was on a gimbal that's kind of doing this, a little bit like the bull that you see in the rodeo restaurants, and so it was kind of like doing that to the actors. It was kind of throwing them, and in order to create the waves, we had these dump tanks, which we couldn't heat. So it was thousands of gallons of water being dumped on them, with our stunt coordinator saying, "We better, that one dump tank wasn't enough. Let's go with 2, Ron." Well, okay, all right. Eunice, our stunt coordinator, she did a great job, and they did it. They endured it, as with everything in this movie, in order to get at the integrity of this, what their characters had really gone through. They were brave, they were courageous. I'll never forget it. And later, I did the ice bucket challenge, where they, because I'm the director, I'm standing over here in a nice raincoat, plenty warm. I'm not getting much water on me. When I did the ice bucket challenge, I realized, oh my God, I was doing this to these poor bastards about 6 times a night. But they never turned on the director. There was, no mutiny at any point, which I was forever grateful for.
It's amazing. Switching gears slightly, and we'll talk more about the new movie in a moment, but I think it's also a great opportunity to have you here and to hear a bit about how you got into this business, talk a bit about your creative development. There's creative people in the audience. You mentioned you could have been a basketball coach, or you could have been a sports writer. That's fascinating to hear. You started out acting at a very young age, but I wonder, do you remember the moment when you made that decision to not go into something else and you did want to go into directing?
It was something, it was kind of gradual. There was, when I was about 7 or 8 years old, all the directors on the Andy Griffith Show had been actors, and I had also seen my father, Rance Howard, who's an actor, still working today, do a lot of directing of plays and scene workshops and things like that. And he was also a writer. But I remember one time when I was about 7 or 8 years old, I was in this car scene that was being directed by Howard Morris. If you know the Andy Griffith Show, of course, if you know the Show of Shows, Howard Morris was a hilarious character actor. On the Andy Griffith Show, he played Ernest T. Bass, this insane guy from the hills who was throwing rocks through the window all the time. But he was also a great director, and got an Emmy Emmy nomination, I think, for one of the episodes of the Andy Griffith Show. And one time, as I said, when I was about 8, we were directing this one scene where we were all in the car, and I had to keep leaning over, and I was kind of jamming my ribs into, the handle of the car door. It was really uncomfortable, and they kept saying, "Lean over, Ronnie. Lean a little more to your left. Lean a little more to your left." And he said, "Are you uncomfortable?" I said, "Yeah, I am." And he said, "That okay? As an actor, that tells you that you're in the right spot." He honestly told me early on, he said, you're probably going to wind up being a director. And I don't know if he was joking around or not, but that's when I began to actually think about it. And my pat answer when I was a kid to what do you want to do when you grow up was, I want to be an actor, writer, producer, director, cameraman, and baseball player. Because I figured it could be a seasonal thing, I was fascinated by everything that was going on, on the technical side as well as the creative side. I was privy to all those creative conversations, the rewriting the script, the actors, raising concerns and pitching new ideas. And they even allowed me to be a part of that, which was just remarkable and rewarding and very, very, very gratifying. But as I grew older, it was really when I saw The Graduate and those movies that were kind of coming out around that period that I began to see the movie experience as something different than what I had witnessed in TV. That there was this immersive possibility, this way of kind of transporting yourself, and I began to realize that there was this job of being the director wasn't just kind of organizing masters and over the shoulders and close-ups. It wasn't just doing the script as given. It was creating a total experience for the audience, and I just fell in love with the medium. And so it stopped being a pat answer, and started being something that I really began reading about, exploring, making a lot of Super 8 movies, and so forth. Then I became, I directed my first movie for Roger Corman, and we started shooting the day after my 23rd birthday.
You were on another very successful show. I certainly watched it every week. Happy Days, at an age which was clearly, I'm sure, very formative for you, because again, kind of the same question, but from that perspective of a teenager and heading into your young adulthood, the kinds of experience you gained from being on a show like that, not just clearly seeing the mass impact you could have on a public,
right.
But again, you're at a formative age now. Creatively, I assume you were just like, developing or shooting your own stuff. Like, tell us about some kind of the experiences and interactions you had in your life creatively in Hollywood at that time that would then lead you when you became a director or inspire you.
Well, George Lucas was about to be one of the Kennedy Center honorees. Much deserved. He was a huge inspiration for me, and that was American Graffiti was a whole other kind of cinematic approach that I'd really never witnessed before, with an unbelievable attention to detail, and also a real penchant for authenticity, spontaneity. He encouraged us to improvise. It was a completely new kind of experience. There were hippies making this movie. There were actually women on the crew. It was, it was so different from anything I would experience in old Hollywood. But it was also a sensibility that was really inspiring for me at that time. And I had already been accepted to USC Film School. George was kind of even though he was only 28 years old, he was, and 8 years removed from USC. He was kind of a famous graduate. And we talked a lot about that. And so by the time Happy Days, the series, rolled around, I had to leave USC Film School to do it. So I had to make this sort of career decision. I tried to balance the two things. But it was a great learning experience. At a certain point, my wife Cheryl and I got married early. We met in high school. We got married at 21. And the show was so all enveloping at that point that I realized that at a certain point, a year had gone by, and I hadn't made a short film. I hadn't written anything. And I asked Cheryl if it was okay. We had a 2-bedroom apartment, and I bought a 16-millimeter Moviola, which is what you edited on in those days. And I said, I want to buy it. I hope to use it. But until then, I just want to set it in the bedroom that we're not using, so that every time I go by that door, I realize there's no film on that Moviola. And that sort of motivated me to re-engage. And then soon I got the Roger Corman opportunity to do Grand Theft Auto. I learned a lot about comedy by being around Happy Days, because it was a different sort of tone. The writer's room, the jokes were harder. I learned a lot about comedy rhythms. Great comedy director Jerry Paris. But one of the most important things that happened was that Anson Williams, the guy who played Potsy, had a great idea for a TV movie, and I got to direct it. And it was called Skyward. General Electric sponsored it, and it starred Bette Davis. And this was remarkable. Now, she wanted to do the part because it was a really good role for her at that point. It was about a young paraplegic girl who wanted to fly a plane. She wanted the freedom of flight, and Bette Davis played this aerobatic pilot who agreed to teach her, sort of over the parents' concerns and so forth. So it was an inspirational story. Bette Davis really wanted to do it, but it really bothered her that this guy from a sitcom was directing. So whenever I would talk to her on the phone, she'd talk a little bit about the script. I hadn't met her in person. She kept calling me Mr. Howard. And I said, well, Miss Davis, please just call me Ron. And she said, I will call you Mr. Howard until I decide whether I like you or not, and hung up. So I was tossing and turning and trying to figure out what it was going to be like to direct Bette Davis. I had done my Roger Corman movie. I'd done a couple of others, TV movies. But this was the first time I was really working with somebody that formidable. And my father, Rance, gave me some great advice. He said, look, she's a pro. She's a pro's pro. And every good actor knows they need great direction. So, you know your way around. Be thoughtful, choose your words, but do your job. Don't back away from that. and she'll respect that. So we went into the first day of shooting, and all I knew was that we were shooting in Texas, in Plano, Texas, in August. It was unbelievably hot, but I'd seen pictures of her and her favorite director, William Wyler, and William Wyler always wore a suit, jacket, and tie, so that's what I did on the first day. But I went walking up to her to give her a direction, and she acted startled. She went, oh. And then for the whole crew, she said, oh, I saw this child walking toward me. I couldn't help but be startled and wonder, what could this child possibly have to say to me of any consequence? Ha, 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 ha. So I went, ha, 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 too. I turned around and kind of popped a couple of Tums, But I went ahead and I gave her the direction that I had intended to give her, and we worked our way through the first part of the day. And finally, there was a scene later in the day where she was really, the staging was not working, and she had some instinct of hers was really not working well. And I went in and I made an adjustment. I said, Miss Davis, I think you should set the glass down here and exit on this line instead of waiting that other line, and then maybe try a turn at the door. I had some thoughts, and she said, oh, I don't think that will work for me at all, but I'll try it. You know why? Because I'm always the director's kid. Ha, 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 ha. And I said, well, I would appreciate it if you try it. Let's just do a rehearsal. And we did it, and she tried the rhythm that I was talking about, and halfway through she said, you're right, I understand what you're talking about, let's shoot it. And we did it, and she said, thank you very much. Now, when I said, good night, Miss Davis. Great first day. I'll see you tomorrow. She said, good night, Ron. And she patted me on the ass. So it wasn't all honeymoon and lovey-dovey after that either, but it was a great experience and a learning experience that I wouldn't have had not Anson Williams had that idea, and also the passion as a producer to pursue casting Bette Davis, which is what he did.
That's great. Great story. Thank you. I don't know where to go from that. So,
in the heart of the sea. What are we here for?
I'm going to let our audience take us through the next few minutes. Let's see what kind of questions they have. Anything about the new film, anything about the past. We do have a microphone, which is right there.
Test.
And we'll go up here in the second row in the center, and then we'll go over to you, right here in the center. You'll go neast.
I was looking back at your filmography, and I noticed you really haven't done a sports film. Or at least something that was, overtly a sports film. I was curious to know why that was, and also with this film, I was curious to know why you didn't. I mean, the temptation is to do it as 3D. Was there ever a temptation or any interest in that, and why you didn't?
Okay, well, I've never done a team sport movie, although I had a little league scene in Parenthood. And a drunken softball scene in Gung Ho. I did do Rush, Formula One racing movie, and Cinderella Man, a boxing movie. But I love team sports, and one of these days I'm gonna find the right one to do. We didn't have the budget for 3D. I had no experience with 3D. I didn't know what shooting on the water with 3D cameras would be like. So, Warner Brothers agreed, and we didn't shoot in 3D. But the movie was originally slotted to go out last March. It was finished, and they started the test screenings, and I'm grateful. The movie played very well. It tested very well, and Warner's came back to us and said, what do you think about moving it to December? We have an open slot in December. Brian Grazer and I, along with the other producers, really felt like the movie was best served playing at that time. That it's a time when movies are a little more open to dramas, and even though this is epic and has this action adventure, it's very much a drama. And so we agreed, and because I think the studio also liked what the final outcome of the movie was, they also came to me and said, what do you think about a 3D conversion? And I said, well, I've never had any experience with it. Show me some tests. And then I began to see the movies that I'd seen in 3D, what had been shot 3D, what had been converted. I began to feel it was possible. I saw the tests. Just like the whale technology, the technology around 3D conversion is kind of stunning in what's been achieved. And I just saw, we've had this entire period of time to work on it. Last week, I saw the final 3D print. And I would just say, look, the movie was designed to be a big screen 2D experience, and I'm very proud of the way it plays. But if you like 3D, I'm really happy with what it does for the movie. And so I those who enjoy the 3D experience, I would really recommend that they see the movie that way.
Okay, we're going to go there, and then we'll go over to you. Yes.
Hi, Ron. My name is Jackie Lee. I have a question in regards to marketing. Marketing is pretty much an intuitive. I mean, after a while, when you have a great story or a great brand, you pretty much know the target audience you want to reach. In the heart of the sea, you being a director, do you participate in the marketing, and do you know who you're targeting towards this film?
Yeah. Good. Well, it's a good question. I don't think of myself as a great marketing mind. In fact, I've had a lot of movies that I suspected wouldn't do very well, but that I was passionate about, that in fact wound up being, top 10 movies in their year, or top 20 movies at the box office, like Apollo 13, or I never thought that would be particularly commercial. Beautiful Mind, and they turned out they were. Other times I've been wrong about movies that I guessed would be. Brian Grazer has a much better nose for these things. So I kind of fall in love with the movie, and I tell the story that I'm eager to share. Now, in this case, I think the themes are adult. We're PG-13. We found in our screenings that sort of young adults and older kids really like the movie, but I didn't back away from the mature subjects in the story, and I really hope it finds its audience. And I really do hope people see it on a big screen. I'll admit I was a little frustrated that the movie Rush, which was so well reviewed, we had such great test scores and all that stuff, that it was okay here in the U.S., but not enough people saw it on the big screen to satisfy the director, because it really was a big screen adventure. And then people kept coming up to me afterwards and saying, wow, I didn't know what to expect with that movie, and I finally caught up with it. I saw it on an airplane, or I saw it on my iPad or something, and wow, really good movie. And I thought, oh man, okay, good, thank you for that compliment. But where were you when you could have really seen the movie? And I sort of feel that way about In the Heart of the Sea, I'll admit.
Okay, over here in the third row on the end. Hi.
Hello. So my question is, you've spoken about why you like making and telling true stories, but what struggles do you face when you adapt stories that people are familiar with?
Well, it's always an editorial decision, and this is always a creative and personal interpretation of real events. It's some movies are closer to being, to use a journalistic term, a kind of a TikTok than others. But I think what you have to do, and Peter Morgan, who writes, brilliantly with real characters and real events, but also freely invents scenes. But that invention is almost always targeted at revealing a discovered truth about those characters that can't necessarily be sort of coalesced without creating a scene that sort of defines it. So there's definitely artistic license taken with this story, but not in terms of the framework of the journey, the experience, the feeling that they had, and I think the truth of that industry at that time, and I hope a little bit of Melville's creative struggle to sort of tackle the subject of this story.
The next question is up here in the back, and the microphone's coming right behind you. Then we'll go over there.
How you doing, Ron? Good. Hi. I just had a quick question. What actor or actress would you most like to direct in the future? And on a personal note, would you have time to take a picture of my daughter after this is done?
She looks like she does belong in our family.
Thank you.
Look, there are so many talented people that to cite one would be to ignore so many others. And I really believe that between television, internet content, and the movies, and the growing international scope and outreach of those movies, there are, sadly, so many talented people that I'll never get to cast, and so many great options with just about every movie. And I know that sounds like a very diplomatic answer, but it's to me it's always about finding a story, a set of characters that are really worth bringing to life, and then being incredibly ambitious about going out there and finding the people who can not only fulfill my sense of what it should be, but take it to another level yet.
On the stairs is a woman with NYC
Yes.
cap.
Hi. So I saw all that water and I thought about flashbacks to Sandy, the superstorm that hit New York City. And I was a volunteer in that. And I was wondering, did you draw on any research and what that research was for climate change or anything to do with the environment or water in general?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, nothing related to climate change. Lots related to being at sea and particularly storms. There's a fantastic film. In fact, you can get it at the South Street Seaport, which is where I found it. That a young guy did in I think 1930 about a tall ship going around the Horn, and that was unbelievable, where he kept climbing up and sort of tying the camera off in places, and you could see the water swamping the deck and feel the movement. So we had lots and lots of reference material. One of the things that I do when I'm making a movie, fiction or nonfiction, is I start gathering that kind of visual material, and still photos go up on the walls. These color Xeroxes from all the departments, the art department, the wardrobe department, our own research. And then I also put TVs in various places, and we just run a loop of documentaries, movie sequences that help establish a kind of an aesthetic and a sense of what it is that we're trying to achieve. And we had YouTube footage, we had racing footage, we had Greenpeace footage, Whale Wars, Deadliest Catch, silent movies about real whaling. The John Huston Moby-Dick movie was there. Scenes, of course, from Jaws, Ridley Scott's White Squall. I mean, we just had a lot of great reference material there playing all the time. The themes that you're talking about, not so much climate change, but man versus nature, is there in the Moby-Dick story. And that's, I think, one of the things that he gleaned from this story of the Essex, because when you read the men's journals, they wondered in their writing whether this was some sort of divine retribution. Was this nature or God's hand punishing them in the form of this whale? They almost felt like there was something supernatural about it, and it called into question sort of their place in the world and their role in this industry. Even then, when this is how they made their living.
We don't have too much time left. All the way in the back. Hi.
You've taken us through many of our childhoods and borne us aloft in many different genres. But there's a show right now of Shackleton from 100 years ago, and how his whole boat was captured in ice, and of course the tragic story there. But I wondered if it's not difficult to select a proper clip, because the clips that you showed, although they're splendid for you, they're in medias res for us, and we don't really get the significance of them. And I see on television when people show bad clips, I go, oh, that's a film I don't want to go to. And that's not fair to the film, but the clip is the responsible one if it doesn't adequately encompass the fabulosity of the film.
I like that fabulosity word. Always a challenge. Particularly, the more complicated the story in a lot of ways, the tougher to sort of determine which clips to show, and so I am always hoping that while we do our best to choose clips, build trailers, and so forth, that's not an area that I control, but I have some influence over it. You always hope it's somehow getting a message out there, and as a director, you also hope that people will that there'll be some trust, that they'll sort of say, well, if this filmmaker's involved, I'm going to trust that this is going to be worth my time. That's more and more challenging. And look, I feel it too as a consumer, as a fan. I love the movies, but there are lots and lots of competition for movies. And that's one of the things that I like about this film, because I think it demands to be seen on a big screen. I really like the fact that we're out this time of year, a time when people don't just think about the one movie they want to go to. You know, they start thinking about the 2 or 3 films they might want to check out, and I certainly hope we fall into that category.
Well, the movie opens December 11th. You can see it on the big screen, 3D or 2D. Here's what we're going to do. We do have one more scene from the movie. So that we can let Ron get to his next engagement, I'm going to ask everybody to stay in your seats. In a moment, we're going to thank him for attending. And then as he's leaving and as we get ready to finish up, we'll show you that last clip. So this is a sign to the booth to get ready to show it. And you'll have a last taste of the movie, but you'll have to see the real drama in the theater.
And let's hope that you all label it with fabulosity, because I like that. That's a great
Thank you
word.
very much, Ron Howard.
Thanks a lot. Appreciate it. Thank you.